David stared at the envelope in his hands, his breath hitching as a wave of dread washed over him. It had arrived in the mail that morning, anonymous and unmarked, except for his name scribbled across the front. He hesitated, his fingers trembling before finally tearing it open. Inside was a single photograph printed on glossy paper. The image showed his wife, Laura, laughing in the arms of another man. They were sitting in a dimly lit restaurant, her hand resting intimately on his. The timestamp in the corner made David's stomach churn. It was from 2 nights ago, the same night Laura had told him she was working late. He felt his chest tighten as he flipped the photo over and saw a note scrawled in messy handwriting. "Thought you'd want to know the truth." David dropped the envelope onto the kitchen counter and braced himself against the edge of the sink. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he'd just seen. He and Laura had been married for 10 years, building a life that until now he thought was solid and secure. That evening, Laura returned home, her usual cheerful self, oblivious to the storm brewing inside David. He watched her move around the kitchen, humming to herself as she prepared dinner, her smile so casual, so innocent, it made him sick. "Busy day at work?" he asked, his voice steady, though his knuckles whitened as he gripped the counter. Laura paused for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, same old stuff. Meetings, deadlines, you know how it is." David forced a smile, masking the turmoil beneath the surface. "Must be exhausting," he said, his tone deceptively calm. "It is," Laura replied, turning back to the stove. "But I love what I do. Keeps me on my toes." As she spoke, David felt a flicker of rage ignite in his chest. How could she lie so effortlessly? How could she look him in the eye and act as though everything was fine? That night, after Laura had gone to bed, David sat alone in the living room, staring at the photograph. The image felt like a dagger lodged in his heart, each glance at it twisting the blade further. He knew he couldn't confront her yet, not until he had all the answers. The next morning, David called in sick to work and began his investigation. He combed through Laura's social media accounts, her text messages, her emails, looking for any clues that might confirm what the photograph had already told him. What he found only deepened his despair. A string of messages between Laura and a contact saved as Mike revealed a relationship that had been going on for months. The exchanges were flirtatious, intimate, and at times explicit. They spoke of stolen moments, secret meetings, and promises that made David's stomach turn. David spent the rest of the day gathering evidence, saving screenshots, printing texts, and documenting every detail. He wasn't just going to confront her. He was going to make sure she couldn't deny a single thing. That evening, Laura came home again, her demeanor unchanged. David watched her closely, noting every casual smile, every unassuming word. She was so comfortable, so confident in her deceit, that it enraged him. "You seem distracted," she said at dinner, glancing at him over her wineglass. David forced a chuckle. "Just tired, I guess. Work's been hectic." Laura nodded sympathetically, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "We should plan a weekend getaway soon, just the two of us. It's been too long since we had some time together." David swallowed the bile rising in his throat and smiled. "That sounds nice." As Laura went to bed that night, David stayed up again, poring over the evidence he had collected. He knew he needed a plan, a way to expose her lies, to make her face the consequences of her betrayal. But more than that, he wanted to ensure she couldn't walk away unscathed. By the time the sun rose, David had a plan in motion. It was calculated, methodical, and ruthless. Everything Laura's actions deserved. He wasn't going to be the victim in this story. He was going to take control, and he was going to make sure Laura understood the full weight of her choices. David's first move was to enlist the help of someone who could provide him with more concrete evidence. He reached out to an old friend, James, who had a background in private investigations. They hadn't spoken in years, but when David explained the situation, James didn't hesitate. "Send me everything you have so far," James said over the phone. "I'll see what I can dig up. And David, I'm sorry you're going through this. No one deserves this kind of betrayal." David sent James the photograph, the screenshots, and the text messages. It didn't take long for James to respond with new information. "She's been meeting him regularly at a boutique hotel downtown," James said during their follow-up call. "Room 214, same time every Thursday. I've got photos of them entering and leaving together." David's grip on his phone tightened. Hearing it confirmed was like pouring salt into an open wound, but it also fueled his resolve. "Thanks, James," he said, his voice steady. "Keep tracking her. I want every detail." The following Thursday, David pretended to leave for work as usual, but instead he parked his car a few blocks away and waited. Sure enough, he saw Laura's car pull out of the driveway an hour later, heading in the direction of the hotel. David followed at a safe distance, his heart pounding in his chest. When she parked outside the hotel and walked in, David waited in his car, watching the entrance. About 10 minutes later, a man appeared. Mike. He greeted Laura with a kiss before they disappeared inside. David felt his blood boil, but he forced himself to stay calm. This wasn't the time to act on impulse. He needed to see his plan through. Later that evening, Laura returned home as if nothing had happened. She greeted David with a kiss on the cheek, asking how his day had been. "Same old," he replied, his tone neutral. "What about you?" "Oh, just work," she said casually. "You know how it is. Back-to-back meetings." David nodded, suppressing the anger threatening to surface. "Must have been exhausting." "It was," Laura said, yawning. "I think I'm going to turn in early tonight." David watched her retreat to their bedroom, his jaw clenched. She didn't even flinch while lying to his face. Over the next few days, David continued to gather evidence with James's help. They collected credit card statements, hotel receipts, and even audio recordings of Laura and Mike's conversations. David was meticulous, ensuring there were no gaps or loopholes that Laura could exploit to deny her actions. But David wasn't just focused on the evidence. He was also planning his revenge. He wanted to expose Laura's betrayal in a way that would leave no doubt about her guilt and make her regret every decision she had made. He started by reaching out to their closest friends and family, inviting them to a dinner party at their home the following weekend. "It's been a while since we all got together," he said, masking his true intentions with ease. Laura, oblivious to his plan, was thrilled. "That sounds perfect," she said, kissing him on the cheek. "I'll help with the planning." David forced a smile. "I'll take care of everything. You just relax." As the day of the dinner party approached, David finalized every detail of his plan. He had set up a hidden projector in the living room, connected to a laptop containing all the evidence he and James had gathered. The night of the party, the house buzzed with laughter and conversation as their friends and family mingled. Laura played the perfect hostess, smiling and chatting as if her life wasn't built on lies. David waited until everyone had finished dinner before standing up to make a toast. "I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he began, his voice steady. "It means a lot to have all of you here, especially in times like these." Laura looked at him, her smile faltering slightly. "Times like these?" she asked, her tone light but tinged with confusion. David met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Yes, Laura, times like these." With that, he pressed a button on a remote, and the projector sprang to life. The room fell silent as photos, screenshots, and audio recordings played on the screen. Gasps echoed around the room as the evidence of Laura's affair unfolded before their eyes. Laura's face turned ashen. "David, what are you doing?" she stammered, her voice shaking. "Showing everyone the truth," David replied coldly. The room was heavy with silence, punctuated only by the faint hum of the projector as it continued to display damning evidence of Laura's betrayal. Every photo, every screenshot, every recording David had painstakingly gathered painted a vivid picture of her deceit. Gasps turned to murmurs among the guests as they exchanged shocked glances. Laura, frozen in place, looked like a deer caught in headlights. Her face turned red with embarrassment, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the table. "David," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk, privately?" David didn't flinch. He remained standing, his gaze cold and unrelenting. Why? So you can spin another lie? Everything they need to know is right there. He motioned toward the screen, where her text exchanges with Mike glared back at her like an accusation. Laura turned to the crowd, her voice desperate. This isn't what it looks like. There's an explanation. An explanation? David interrupted, his tone sharp. You mean there's a justification for sneaking around, for lying to my face, for tearing apart everything we built together? Please, Laura. Enlighten us. The weight of his words landed heavily in the room, leaving no space for rebuttal. Laura's mother, seated near the corner, covered her mouth in disbelief. One of Laura's closest friends shook her head, clearly appalled. Laura, is this true? Her sister asked, her voice wavering. Laura stammered, her words failing her as she looked around the room searching for sympathy and finding none. It's not. I didn't mean for this to happen, David scoffed. Didn't mean for what to happen? To betray me? To spend months lying while pretending everything was fine? Save it, Laura. I'm done listening to excuses. The room remained tense as David addressed the group. I didn't invite you all here just to expose this, he said, his voice firm but measured. I invited you because I needed everyone to know the truth. For too long, I've been in the dark, but not anymore. Turning back to Laura, he added, You made your choices. Now you can live with the consequences. The party unraveled quickly after that. Guests began to leave, most too uncomfortable to stay, while a few approached David quietly to offer their support. Laura tried to follow him as he moved toward the kitchen, her voice pleading. David, please, can we talk? I made a mistake, but we can fix this. We can work through it. David turned to face her, his expression cold and unyielding. Work through what, Laura? The fact that you've been cheating on me for months? That you've disrespected everything we've built? No, Laura, there's no working through this. Laura's eyes filled with tears as she realized the gravity of the situation. David wasn't just angry, he was done. That night, after everyone had left, David sat in the now empty living room, the projector still casting a dim glow on the wall. Laura tried one last time to talk to him, but he refused to listen. I'm leaving, he said flatly, standing up and grabbing a bag he had packed earlier. Leaving? Where are you going? She asked, panic creeping into her voice. Somewhere you're not, he replied, his tone devoid of emotion. David, please don't do this. We can go to counseling, we can fix this, she pleaded, reaching for his arm. He pulled away, his gaze piercing. I'm not interested in fixing anything with you, Laura. You destroyed this marriage the moment you decided I wasn't enough for you. Now you can live with the fallout. With that, David walked out the door, leaving Laura standing in the empty house, tears streaming down her face. But David's plan wasn't over. Leaving was just the beginning. He had already begun the process of protecting his finances, ensuring that Laura couldn't take advantage of him in the divorce. He had also secured legal advice, ensuring that her infidelity would work in his favor when it came to dividing their assets. For David, this wasn't just about ending their marriage. It was about reclaiming his dignity and ensuring Laura faced the consequences of her betrayal. David didn't look back as he walked out the door. His footsteps echoed in the quiet of the night, each one heavy with finality. As he got into his car, he allowed himself a moment to exhale, the weight of the evening pressing down on him. But he knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of his plan. The first stop on his journey was a hotel he had pre-booked. He checked in under an alias, ensuring Laura wouldn't be able to find him. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of control over his life. That night, as he lay in bed, his phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages from Laura. He ignored them all. Instead, he opened his laptop and began to finalize the next steps of his plan. The following morning, David met with his lawyer, a sharp and seasoned professional named Rebecca. He laid everything out, the evidence, the timeline, and his intentions. David, this is rock solid, Rebecca said, flipping through the photos and messages. Her infidelity puts you in a very strong position, especially with the prenup you had her sign before the marriage. You'll be able to protect your assets, no question. David nodded. I want to make sure she doesn't get away with this. She lied to me, betrayed me, and I want her to face the consequences." Rebecca leaned back in her chair, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Don't worry, David. By the time we're done, she'll regret every choice she made." While Rebecca worked on the legal side of things, David focused on dismantling the facade Laura had built. He began reaching out to mutual friends and colleagues, subtly dropping hints about the affair and ensuring they knew the truth. Laura, meanwhile, was spiraling. She had tried calling David countless times, leaving tearful voicemails begging him to come home and talk things through. But David remained silent, refusing to engage. One evening, she showed up at Rebecca's office, demanding to speak to him. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson," Rebecca said, her tone icy. "David has instructed me not to relay any messages. If you have something to say, you can do so through your own attorney." Laura's face crumpled and she left the office in tears, feeling more isolated than ever. As the days turned into weeks, David continued to execute his plan with precision. He had already moved the majority of his assets into a separate account, ensuring Laura couldn't touch them. He also began the process of filing for divorce, citing infidelity as the primary reason. When the divorce papers were served, Laura's reaction was explosive. She stormed into their now empty house, screaming into the void. The life she had taken for granted was unraveling before her eyes, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She tried to reach out to her friends for support, but many of them had already distanced themselves after learning the truth. Her once perfect social circle had crumbled, leaving her isolated and alone. David, on the other hand, was thriving. With the weight of his toxic marriage lifted, he began to focus on himself. He started working out, reconnecting with old friends, and even exploring new hobbies. One evening, while scrolling through his phone, he came across an old photo of himself and Laura from happier times. For a brief moment, a pang of sadness washed over him. But it was quickly replaced by a sense of relief. Those memories were part of his past, but they no longer defined him. He had taken back control of his life, and he wasn't about to let anyone take that away from him again. Meanwhile, Laura's life continued to spiral downward. The man she had cheated with, Mike, had distanced himself from her as soon as the affair came to light. Without David's support, she struggled to maintain the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to. She tried to reach out to David one last time, sending a long, heartfelt email, apologizing for everything and begging for a chance to talk. David read the email but didn't respond. He had made his decision, and nothing Laura said could change that. Instead, he forwarded the email to Rebecca with a single line. "File it all." Laura's desperation grew with every passing day. Her once comfortable life was falling apart, and the realization that she was entirely alone began to sink in. She spent sleepless nights staring at her phone, hoping for a response from David that never came. Meanwhile, David was quietly tying up loose ends. He had already filed for divorce and ensured that Laura couldn't touch any of his assets. But he wasn't done yet. His final move was one he had been planning meticulously, a confrontation that would leave no doubt in Laura's mind about the extent of her betrayal and the consequences of her actions. He arranged a meeting at their former home, inviting Laura to come under the guise of discussing the terms of their separation. She agreed eagerly, thinking it might be her chance to plead her case and salvage what little was left of their relationship. When Laura arrived, David was already there, sitting at the dining table with a stack of documents in front of him. His expression was calm, almost unnervingly so, as he gestured for her to sit down. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Laura hesitated before sitting across from him. "David, I just want to say—" He held up a hand, cutting her off. "You'll get your chance to speak. But first, I need you to listen." David reached for a folder and pulled out a stack of papers. "These are the divorce papers. Everything has been accounted for. Your infidelity, the financial arrangements, the division of property. All you have to do is sign." Laura's eyes widened as she scanned the documents. "David, please, can we talk about this? I made a mistake, but we can work through this. I love you." David leaned back in his chair, his gaze cold. "You loved me? Is that what you were thinking when you were sneaking around with Mike? When you lied to my face every single day? Don't insult me, Laura. This isn't about love. It's about accountability." Laura's hands trembled as she flipped through the papers. "This isn't fair. she said, her voice breaking. "You're punishing me for one mistake." "One mistake?" David's voice rose, the anger he had kept buried finally surfacing. "You call months of deceit, betrayal, and lies one mistake? Don't you dare minimize what you've done." He slammed a small recorder onto the table. "Do you know what this is? It's a recording of your conversations with Mike. Every lie, every plan you made to keep me in the dark. It's all here. And if you think I'm being unfair, imagine what would happen if I played this for our friends, your family, or even the court." Laura's face turned pale as the gravity of his words sank in. "David, please. You don't have to do this." David ignored her plea, his voice steady but firm. "You made your choices, Laura, and now you have to live with them. Sign the papers, and we'll both move on. Refuse, and I'll make sure everyone knows the truth about who you really are." Tears streamed down Laura's face as she picked up the pen. Her hands shook as she signed each page, the weight of her decisions pressing down on her like a ton of bricks. When she finished, David gathered the papers and stood up. "Goodbye, Laura. I hope you find whatever it is you were looking for." As he walked to the door, Laura called out to him one last time. "David, wait, please. I love you. I made a mistake, but I can't lose you." David paused but didn't turn around. "You already did," he said simply before walking out, leaving Laura sobbing at the table. Outside, David took a deep breath, the cool evening air filling his lungs. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of closure. He had faced the betrayal head-on, taken control of the situation, and ensured that Laura would face the consequences of her actions. But as he got into his car and drove away, he knew his journey wasn't over. He had reclaimed his dignity and protected his future, but there was still one final step left in his plan, a symbolic act that would allow him to truly move on. David didn't drive home after leaving the house that evening. Instead, he went to a storage unit he had rented weeks prior. Inside, he had carefully stored all the remnants of his life with Laura: wedding photos, anniversary cards, souvenirs from vacations, and the countless little keepsakes that once symbolized their love. He stood in the dim light of the unit, staring at the boxes that held a decade of memories. For a moment, he felt the weight of sadness press down on him. This wasn't how he had envisioned his life turning out. He had loved Laura deeply, trusted her, built a future with her. But those memories, as cherished as they once were now tainted by her betrayal. David opened one of the boxes and pulled out their wedding album. He flipped through the pages, his fingers lingering on a photo of them smiling at each other during their first dance. His jaw tightened as he remembered the promises they had made to each other that day, promises she had shattered. With a deep breath, he placed the album back in the box and reached for a gasoline canister he had brought with him. Methodically, he poured the liquid over the boxes, the pungent smell filling the air. Stepping back, he lit a match and watched as the flames engulfed the memories. The fire roared to life, consuming everything inside the storage unit. David stood there, watching until the fire had reduced everything to ash. It wasn't just about destroying the physical items, it was about letting go of the emotional baggage they carried. This was his symbolic act of closure, a way to reclaim his life and start anew. The next day, David made another important decision. He contacted a realtor and put the house he and Laura had shared up for sale. The house, once a place of love and comfort, now felt like a prison filled with painful memories. When Laura found out, she was livid. She called him repeatedly, leaving angry voicemails demanding to know why he was selling their home. David didn't respond. He had no interest in engaging with her anymore. Instead, he focused on his own future. He found a small modern apartment in the city, far from the life he had shared with Laura. It was a fresh start, a blank slate where he could begin rebuilding his life. As David settled into his new home, he began to rediscover himself. He joined a local gym, pouring his energy into getting back in shape. He reconnected with old friends who welcomed him with open arms and even started exploring new hobbies like hiking and photography. One evening, while scrolling through social media, he stumbled upon an old friend from college, Emily. They had been close back in the day, and he decided to send her a message. To his surprise, she responded immediately. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, and before long they had arranged to meet for coffee. When they met, David was struck by how comfortable he felt with Emily. She was kind, intelligent, and had a sense of humor that immediately put him at ease. As they talked, he realized how much he had missed this kind of genuine connection. Over the next few weeks, David and Emily grew closer. She became a source of support and encouragement, reminding him of the man he used to be before his marriage had eroded his confidence. For the first time in a long time, David felt hopeful about the future. He wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. Meanwhile, Laura's life continued to spiral out of control. The divorce had left her with little more than the clothes on her back, and her social circle had all but abandoned her. Even Mike, the man she had risked everything for, had moved on, leaving her to deal with the fallout alone. She reached out to David one last time, sending him a long, heartfelt letter. She apologized for everything, admitting her mistakes and begging for forgiveness. She wrote about how much she missed him, and how she regretted every decision that had led to their separation. David read the letter but felt no anger, no sadness, just indifference. He folded it neatly, placed it in a drawer, and moved on with his day. For David, the chapter with Laura was closed. He had taken control of his life, faced the betrayal head-on, and emerged stronger. The memories of their marriage were now just that. Memories. They no longer held power over him. As he stood on the balcony of his new apartment, looking out at the city lights, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had rebuilt his life from the ashes of betrayal, and for the first time in years, he was truly free. Months passed, and David's new life took shape, filled with purpose and hope. He had found solace in the quiet moments and strength in his newfound independence. His days were no longer consumed by thoughts of betrayal, but instead focused on personal growth and rebuilding his happiness. His friendship with Emily blossomed into something deeper. They spent countless evenings talking over dinner, hiking scenic trails, and laughing over shared memories of their college days. Emily was different, genuine, empathetic, and grounded. She wasn't trying to fix him, but simply supported him as he navigated his way forward. One evening, as they sat together on David's balcony, Emily turned to him with a thoughtful look. "David, you've been through so much. Yet here you are, standing stronger than ever," she said, her voice soft but filled with admiration. David smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in years. "I learned the hard way that life doesn't stop for heartbreak. You either let it consume you, or you take control. I chose the latter." Emily reached for his hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "And you did. I hope you know how inspiring that is." Meanwhile, Laura's life had become a stark contrast to David's. She struggled to find stability, moving between temporary jobs and dealing with the stigma of her exposed affair. Her once loyal friends had distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with her actions. Her financial situation worsened, and the house David had sold was now a distant memory. She had moved into a small, run-down apartment on the outskirts of town, far from the comfort and luxury she had taken for granted. One afternoon, while walking through a grocery store, Laura spotted David from a distance. He was laughing with Emily, his face lit with joy. They looked happy, carefree, and deeply connected, a stark reminder of what she had lost. Laura hesitated, wanting to approach him, but something held her back. She knew she had no right to interrupt his happiness. Instead, she turned away, her chest tightening with regret and longing. David didn't notice Laura that day, nor would he have cared if he did. His focus was on the present, on Emily, and on the life he was building for himself. As their relationship deepened, Emily encouraged David to pursue his passion for photography more seriously. He began taking weekend trips to capture landscapes, cityscapes, and candid moments of life. His work gained attention, and soon he was invited to showcase his photos at a local gallery. The night of the exhibition was a milestone for David. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers admired his work, praising his eye for detail and his ability to capture emotion through a lens. Emily stood by his side, beaming with pride. "This is just the beginning, David," she said, her voice filled with certainty. David nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, he saw himself not as a victim of betrayal but as someone who had risen above it. One evening, David received an unexpected email from Laura. It was short and devoid of excuses, just an apology. "I know I can't undo the past, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. Truly. You didn't deserve what I did to you. I hope you found happiness because you deserve it." David read the email and sat with it for a moment. Then, with a calm resolve, he deleted it. He didn't need her apology. He had already forgiven her. Not for her sake, but for his own peace. As the months turned into a year, David's life continued to flourish. He and Emily traveled together, exploring new cities and creating memories that felt like a new chapter in his story. Looking back, David realized that Laura's betrayal, as painful as it had been, was a turning point in his life. It had forced him to confront his own strength, to rebuild from the ground up, and to discover a version of himself he was proud of. On their anniversary, Emily gifted David a custom-made photo album filled with snapshots of their journey together. Inside, she had written a simple message: "Here's to the life we've built and the adventures yet to come." David smiled as he read the words, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He had found peace, love, and purpose again, not because he had sought revenge, but because he had reclaimed his own happiness. David's life had transformed into something he once thought impossible, a life filled with genuine happiness, love, and purpose. His photography had gained a reputation beyond the local scene, with invitations to larger exhibitions and even opportunities to collaborate with established artists. Emily remained his biggest supporter, always encouraging him to pursue his dreams. One evening, as they walked along the beach during a weekend getaway, Emily turned to David with a smile. "You know," she said, her voice soft, "I think the best thing about you is how you've turned pain into something beautiful. It's inspiring." David paused, letting her words sink in. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said sincerely. "You reminded me that there's life beyond the hurt." Emily laughed lightly, nudging his shoulder. "You had it in you all along. I just gave you a little push." Meanwhile, Laura's life remained stagnant, weighed down by the consequences of her actions. She had managed to find a stable job but lived paycheck to paycheck, her once comfortable lifestyle a distant memory. One day, while scrolling through social media, Laura stumbled upon photos from David's latest photography exhibit. He was standing beside Emily, his arm wrapped around her waist, both of them glowing with happiness. Laura stared at the screen, her heart sinking. She had no one to blame but herself for the emptiness she felt. She had destroyed the best thing in her life and was now left to pick up the pieces alone. David, however, had completely moved on. He rarely thought about Laura, and when he did, it was with a sense of closure rather than anger. She was a part of his past, but she no longer held any power over him. One evening, as David and Emily were preparing dinner together, she asked, "Do you ever think about what happened? About her?" David considered the question carefully before responding. "Not really," he admitted. "It's like looking at an old photograph. It's there, but it doesn't mean anything to me anymore." Emily smiled, her eyes warm with understanding. "That's because you've built something better, something real." David nodded, realizing how true her words were. As time went on, David continued to thrive. His photography career reached new heights, and he and Emily began to plan a future together. They discussed everything from where they wanted to live to the trips they wanted to take, and even the possibility of starting a family someday. During one of their conversations, Emily said, "I think the best thing about us is that we're partners. We support each other no matter what." David smiled, taking her hand in his. "That's because we've both seen what happens when trust is broken. We know how important it is to build something strong." For Laura, the weight of regret never lifted. She often thought about the choices she had made and how differently things might have turned out if she had been honest and faithful. But those thoughts brought little comfort. She wrote one final letter to David, not expecting a response but hoping it might bring her some closure. In it, she apologized for everything and wished him happiness in his new life. David received the letter and read it carefully. While he appreciated the sentiment, he felt no need to respond. He had already made peace with the past and was focused on the future. That future, as it turned out, was brighter than David could have imagined. He and Emily continued to grow together, building a life filled with love, laughter, and shared dreams. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Emily leaned her head on David's shoulder. "Do you ever think about how far you've come?" she asked softly. David smiled, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Every day," he said, "and I'm grateful for every step that brought me here." David's life had come full circle, evolving from heartbreak to triumph. He had built something truly meaningful, not only in his relationship with Emily, but also within himself. His once fragile confidence was now unshakable, and his happiness was no longer tied to anyone else's actions. One evening, Emily surprised him with a question that caught him off guard. "David, have you ever thought about sharing your story? You've been through so much, and I think it could help people." David paused, considering her suggestion. "You mean talk about everything? The betrayal, the revenge, all of it?" Emily nodded. "Not in a way that reopens old wounds, but in a way that shows others they can overcome anything. You're living proof of that." The idea took root, and over the next few weeks David began writing down his experiences. He recounted every detail, from the moment he discovered Laura's betrayal to the steps he took to rebuild his life. Writing was cathartic, allowing him to reflect on his journey and how far he had come. When he finished, Emily read the manuscript and encouraged him to publish it. "This is powerful," she said, her eyes shining with pride. "People need to hear this." David hesitated, unsure if he wanted to share something so personal. But ultimately, he realized that his story could be a source of hope and inspiration for others who had faced similar pain. The book, titled From Betrayal to Redemption, was published a few months later. It gained traction quickly, resonating with readers who saw themselves in David's story. He was invited to speak at events, share his insights on podcasts, and even appear on talk shows. Through it all, David remained grounded, crediting his success to the lessons he had learned and the support he had found in Emily. At one event, during a Q&A session, someone asked him, "Do you have any regrets?" David thought for a moment before answering. "I regret staying in a situation where I wasn't valued for as long as I did. But I don't regret the lessons it taught me. Without them, I wouldn't be where I am today." The audience erupted in applause, his words striking a chord with everyone in the room. Meanwhile, Laura came across an article about David's book and his newfound success. Seeing his name in print, along with the praise he was receiving, was a bittersweet moment for her. She bought a copy of the book, reading it in one sitting. Each page felt like a mirror reflecting her mistakes, her selfishness, and the pain she had caused. By the time she reached the final chapter, she was in tears. David's journey was a stark reminder of everything she had lost. Not just him, but the version of herself that had been capable of loyalty and love. David, however, had no idea that Laura had read his book, nor did it matter to him. His focus remained on the present and the future, on building a life that was rich with meaning and joy. One evening, as he and Emily celebrated the book's success over dinner, she raised her glass to toast him. "To resilience," she said with a smile, "and to the man who turned pain into power." David laughed softly, clinking his glass with hers. "To the future," he added. For David, the past was no longer a weight but a stepping stone. He had reclaimed his story, found love again, and built a life that was entirely his own. As he stood on a stage at his latest book signing event, looking out at a crowd of readers eager to hear his story, he realized something profound. He was no longer defined by betrayal or revenge. He was defined by his strength, his courage, and his ability to move forward.